this video, you'll learn how to use the Site Insertion tool in Artlantis. This tool is necessary whenever you are preparing a building license and want to simulate the building in its future environment. In Artlantis, we already have the 3D model of the building done in one of the modelers. We also need a photo of the existing site for the background. Here you can see both situations. On the left-hand side, there's the existing site with the old garage to be replaced by our building. On the right-hand side is the final view of the new building inserted into its future site. Back to Artlantis. As a first step, we need to add the background photo to the scene. We choose the image option for the environment and open the dialog. Double-click to browse the hard drive and import the photo. Generally, the imported photo won't match the proportions of the image in Artlantis. In my case, the image size was already set to 1920 by 1080. This is a different width and height, and I have to change it to the photo's proportions. To do so, I click on the Use Image Size option. I save and close the dialog. The next step is inserting it into the site. As soon as a background was assigned to a camera view, the Insert button in the Perspective Inspector turns active and I can open the dialog. This dialog contains the order of steps to take in the 2D window not yet open, in the Preview window, and list of possible axes for scaling. Let's open the 2D window by clicking on this icon at the upper right-hand side. The window will display a coordinate system. In the top view, the red line represents the x-axis and the green line is the y-axis. The same coordinate system appears in the preview window as well. Here is the origin of it, and the axes are the x in red, the y in green, and the z in blue. The two coordinate systems are independent of each other. However, we need to make them overlap by setting the same position once in the 2D window and then in the preview. It's important to start by finding a common point for the origin of the coordinate systems in both windows. The building will be as large as the existing garage and positioned the same. Therefore, I have to consider this front line and distance. In the preview, I can easily place the origin at the left extremity of this line. In the 2D window, the rounded roof of the building hides the endpoint of the front wall, and I have difficulties when setting the position of the origin. Artlantis offers me an interesting little tool in the 2D window, which allows me to section the model at the camera level and observe what happens below. Now I can place the origin carefully at the corner point of the building. No measurements are needed. Everything happens only graphically in Artlantis. We will now change the view. The front view shows the z-axis for verticals and the y-axis. I check to see if the origin of the coordinate system is placed correctly at the street level in my case. If I had a basement, for example, Artlantis would take into account a general bounding box of the entire geometry and place the origin at its lowest point. This is why we always need to check the positioning in at least two views, top view and one of the side views. Now we continue the settings in the preview window. I place the origin of the coordinate system at the corner of the garage, and I need to set the right directions for the red x-axis and the green y-axis. We don't need to deal with the z-axis because, based on the other two, Artlantis will automatically define the vertical direction for our project. I'm not moving the axis itself. As you can see, the full green line represents the y-axis, and I won't grab this line to move it. The same for x-axis. I'm not moving the full red line. Instead, I'll move this pair of dashes in green for the y-axis, which are the perspective lines toward the same vanishing point. These are the editable lines I can move and change their orientation. Each dash has a dot around which the line turns. This dot can be grabbed and moved to change the position of the perspective lines. For the first perspective line, I'll use one of the sides of this display. I'll align the second perspective line along the gutter of the roof. I change the position and direction of the perspective line. With this, the y-axis has been positioned. You may note that perspective lines don't need to be in the same plane. I can use any direction over the background photo, which is parallel to the y-axis. Now we need to do the same for the x-axis as well. The gutter of the other building will help me to place the first perspective line. I lift the dot and turn the line. What could be a landmark for the second perspective line? The border of this walkway, for example. The dot helps me to move the axis, and then I line up the dashed line along the edge. These settings can be calibrated at any moment, either during the calculation of the insertion or by reopening the same dialog. The last thing is to define the scaling axis in the 2D window and in the preview. I know that the width of the existing garage is the same as the width of my project building. As a result, the scaling will be done along the x-axis, and I check it in the list. In the 2D window, I grab the second dot on the red axis and place it at the right corner of the building. I do the same in the preview. On the x-axis, in addition to the dot representing the origin, I'll find a second dot for scaling. I position it over the right edge of the front line. This way, the same distance was marked in both windows. After all this was done, I set to visible the 3D model by checking the Show 3D Model option. The building appears, and I can start the calculation by clicking on the Start button. The building was inserted. We can now stop the calculation and save it. If I believe that the insertion wasn't properly done because of faulty orientation of some edges of the building not matching with the environment, I can open the insertion dialog again and make changes. What might the reason be for the incorrect orientation? Maybe I didn't match the perspective lines well, or used a direction that is not entirely parallel with my building. When using the Artlantis site insertion tool, we need to rely on our eyes too, being the most accurate control of the final insertion. After the insertion is finished, we can continue to add more details to the scene thanks to Artlantis Media. In front of my building there's a slab. It belongs to the 3D model, not to the photo. Why do I need it? Because when adding objects to the scene, like cars, these items need a base on which they can stand. If I drag a car over the photo, the car won't be added to the scene because it doesn't have support. But if I drag it over the slab, the car will remain. I switch to the object inspector and rotate the car. The same for the second car. Objects can be manipulated in the 2D window as well. The cars are there, and I want them to look as if they were in the street from the photo. Therefore, I'll need to mask some parts of the slab hiding the road and also make it disappear from the front of the car. To do so, I'll use a special shader from the catalog. It can be found among the basic shaders, and its name is Matte Shadow Shader. This shader is capable of making the surface on which it is mapped invisible. The Matte Shadow Shader is also capable of displaying shadows cast over the surface it has made transparent. Now I can clearly see the street in the photo, and at the same time the recently added cars are casting shadows over it. If I want to change the intensity of the shadow, I open the settings of the Matte Shadow Shader in the inspector and change the transparency of the shadow. This video was about the Site Insertion tool and the Matte Shadow Shader. During your work, you may have situations when the insertion becomes very difficult due to the lack of references for the coordinate system. Just think of a countryside with a nice landscape where you have to place your building in the middle of an empty field. Such a site makes the proper orientation of the axis difficult. In this case, I suggest putting a geometrical element on the site before you take the photo. Use a cardboard, for example, and a pole to mark the vertical direction. Place them at a distance that fits your project. Thank you for watching this video.